Hi, welcome back everyone for another episode with Peter Ingel and Mihai Algiu, exploring the teachings, practices of the fourth way teaching, as well as non-duality. And this is ongoing playlist that you find below. And this is episode 48. And last episode, we embarked on this project of kind of addressing some guiding pointers for someone who is really interested in the fourth way teachings, might be a little bit overwhelmed with many books and videos and the complexity of the system. And last time we embarked on this attempt to, as if we have a board game and then you're a player, and what will be the first steps, illuminating the first steps in terms of what to study and what to observe in oneself. And today we'll continue. And as a brief summary, last episode, we talked about the most important practice, and everything the fourth way condenses in this idea, practice of self-remembering. All the ideas are, and all the other practices and study, they are meant to help us remember ourselves more frequently, longer, more depth and depth. Then we talked about mindfulness, self-observation, being present, as well as the first obstacle is called in the fourth way the state of being lost in the mind, daydreaming, imagination. And also something which is more peculiar and important, essential in the fourth way, is realization of being asleep from the point of view of consciousness. So starting to verify this more and more, which is an essential ingredient for becoming more present, more awake. And then this continues. It's not that we are now, I'm awake and I popped. Often in modern day non-duality, people are popping all over the place, meaning that they wake up and the journey is seemingly done. The fourth way, it's a constant waking up to one's sleep and then falling asleep again in the mind, in the emotions, in the sense of me. So we'll continue from here. So let's say, so what will be the next square on the board? If somebody comes to you really interested and they started to work with what we talked last time for a few weeks, few months, and they say, well, all right, I think I get a hang of it. It seems to work, but often I forget. And also there's all kind of stuff that come up in me that take me for a spin. I get identified. I forget about the work and all these powerful forces in my body, in my psychology, all of these urges and beliefs and contradictions are happening, and I forget. And also I don't know what to trust in myself. There's all these eyes. So what would you recommend as the next illuminating the path, like putting a flashlight or a car beams? What would you recommend?
It brings to mind the second piece on the game board, as you called it, which is identification. And more genuinely studying or observing what this means, this word, identification, what's really going on when this happens. Because if awareness could just remain present, if we could just remain present as awareness, as it's often put, then none of these things would trouble us. We would just see them. Whatever comes up from the body, from the mind, in our psychological arena, memories, anticipations, worry, all these things, sensations, deep felt sensations that then in turn evoke emotions in us and thoughts. All of this, we would be able to transform them, actually, by virtue of just looking at them and seeing them and letting them be. By virtue of remaining conscious, they would, in a way, they would just get absorbed by this awareness, this consciousness looking at them and seeing them within itself. But this doesn't happen. This isn't so easily had because of what's called identification. So I would start pointing to this more as helping someone realize this is a big challenge. This is one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge. In fact, imagination, it starts to happen and we immediately identify with it. And that's why it becomes a problem. That's why imagination remains a problem, because we get identified so easily. So what is this? What's happening? Why does it happen to us as human beings so readily? And what does it mean? And what begins to happen if we are less identified? Meaning, often what happens is someone is introduced to this idea and they themselves, the person, try to be less identified with their life. When in fact, what we're really talking about, and this is where I would take someone next more deeply, we're really talking about consciousness itself, awareness itself, becoming attached to whatever it's seeing. And the rest of it, the things that happen, like becoming hurried, becoming worried, insisting on a point of view, all these things, these are forms of identification, but they sort of happen downstream from the real thing. The real thing is awareness itself, instantaneously attaching. Even right now, the tendency when we speak is for awareness immediately to become attached to not only what we're saying, but to the feeling of ourselves as a person saying it. How do we refrain from that so we stay home? We always stay home, but the truth is we're not home. We're not staying home. We're always heading out after each thought, after each motion. We follow them out of the house, and then we get in trouble. So that's why I would talk, and actually, this is where it gets quite individual. And when I'm working with people individually, I help them see their specific areas of identification. Because this is a general topic, but it becomes very particular. And it relates to other things. We've talked about Mihai, such as chief feature. Really, chief feature is sort of the home plate for identification. And this is why it's so difficult to see and why it's so powerful once you do start seeing it. Because now you are really getting into the guts of how identification happens and the particular form it takes when it does happen. And this becomes more demanding internally.
Yeah, it was not a fourth way teacher, but non-dual teacher, Francis, will use this metaphor of going on a misery lane. So yeah, as we are not home and wandering, we are not home, consciously aware, we are start wandering, wandering usually in the mind, kind of consciousness sucked into the mind, and the mind is wandering, and this bio machine is like a big city, and very often we are wandering on a misery lane, some kind of track of suffering of sorts. And we have each one of us, we have our own particular version of misery lane, or several misery lane, or how do you call that? Cul-de-sac, where we are kind of, it's not going anywhere, we're just looping in a circle. And there's been practiced a lot. So you are pointing basically to that's what we haven't synchronized or talked, by the way, for the viewers, what we're going to talk about. So I was curious to see what Peter would say and what I would say. But that's what would come up for me also, to introduce this idea of the concept of false personality. False personality is that what we are not, the result of conditioning, education, adaptation. And this false personality is basically it's consciousness identified with certain patterns, with the body, with the mind. And at the very core of false personality is what Peter mentioned, the chief feature, which is a core pattern or core weakness from the point of view that we fall asleep, and we fall asleep into it, and there is a strong current of going in a certain way of thinking, emoting, and approaching life. And we have in this playlist below, I'm not sure what episode it is, but we talk about chief feature, and then at some point when we talk about body types, we outline in detail each chief feature and how to work with it, several exercises and aims, but just briefly. And also all of these chief features, they come from fear. That's my sense. There's underneath, at the bottom of all of this is fear, existential fear, fear of dying, and all the fears, they come from there. Fear of disappearing, but then fear of elevators, fear of people, fear of intimacy, fear of losing control, fear of emotions, fear of various things. So the chief feature is a pattern in which we adapt it to try to manage the ego, the false personality, to manage life and to find some type of control, safety, familiarity. And some of these features, they are really impersonal, not unique. Although each person, when is asleep, let's say, they feel like their feature is very unique and personal and special. And some example of this would be, dominance, this strong tendency to control oneself, control the environment, control the situation, control other people, believing or sensing one knows better, the other people don't know. There's vanity, trying to get recognition, trying to be seen, trying to be liked, feeling special, either special in an inflated way or special in a deflated, broken way, self-pity, self-deprecation. This what's called in the fourth way mechanical goodness, like being really nice, that comes with a big cost, going against ourselves, doing what we don't want to do, saying yes when we have a no, abandoning ourselves. So basically, I resonate with this idea, Peter, to the next step, as we have more light and we start to observe our false personality and start to discover what is our chief feature, core pattern, because that's when we are going down. And observing that. And it's very important here to, as I mentioned in the previous episode, to observe oneself as a curious, interesting stranger. Watch out for the tendency to observe something and then to judge it, or to try not to have it, or to be upset about having it. Because that's another aspect. False personality is now fighting with itself. So they have this benevolent, scientifical observing. And as he said in the fourth way, it's another important principle at the beginning and all throughout, at least at the beginning and middle stages, I would say, we can't quite change, we can't stop it, we can't get rid of this feature. It's the most very compulsive, psychic, energetic, somatic current. So we can't stop it. And
It's built in. It's almost like the transmission of a car. It's sort of our psychological transmission. And yes, we can't just get rid of it. And we're not meant to either. This is another part of this study. We're not trying to get rid of chief feature.
Yeah, so the idea is to maybe studying some of the knowledge to find out what are those chief features, and we'll probably recognize ourselves. If you watch some of the previous videos with the various features, you will recognize right away people in your life. It will start with that. You are going to see other people as chief feature. It's much easier to see it in others. It's kind of loud and it reeks, it stinks, obvious for other people. And then we start seeing ourselves. So we hone into one or two or three features that the aim is to start observing it. We might not be able to observe it initially. We may do it as an autopsy, like it already happened. You know, I'm going somewhere, I have an aim to be present, and then something happens and I'm in the center of the attention and I'm charming and seducing and funny and taking over the whole show, you know, as vanity and power. And then I'm feeling juiced up. And then when I get in my car, I'm like, oh my God, what was that? Took over me. So we can observe it in retrospect afterwards. But as we know more about it, we start to observe in the middle of it, or as we get more sharp, we observe it is coming up as an impulse, rising up to please or to disappear. There's some other features, some are active features, taking space and being big and loud, and some they are kind of disappearing. So yeah, we can't do much about it. And in the fourth way, this idea that this is like the whole mechanism is like a very complex, Gurdjieff would say like a watch, but now think about it like a very complex computer. So we can't just get in there and get it out. In order to do that, basically everything is connected to everything else. And in order to change something, we need to know everything about it. Also, to change something, we need to have another dimension online, the dimension of the observer, pretty strong, and the ability to not go along with that. So we will be discouraged many times and defeated, but in the process something grows, and for the mere observation of it, it will gradually diminish as we know this feature very well. The idea is to, in the fourth way, they talk about knowing this as a type of creature that comes, to know when it comes, how it looks, how it feels, how it smells, how it tastes. You know, this is metaphorical, so it has a certain flavor, a certain texture. And as we accumulate more and more observation about it, at some point we'll be able to struggle with it. We are aware of it coming, or we are aware that it will come. When I'm going to meet with this person, I'm going to start talking about myself all the time, because that's what I do as chief feature. So we can start putting aims around that and struggle with it. This also will be a little bit discouraging, because those aims will show us how strong it is, this impulse. So yeah, can you share more on this? You know, how do you see this struggling or bringing the work to chief feature or anything else stirred by what I said?
Can you hear the noise in the background of my microphone? No? Good. Yes, just following up on some of the things you were saying, Mihai. To understand this relationship between identification and chief feature, I mentioned it's like the transmission in our car. And so as soon as the process of identification starts, it usually happens through chief feature is the filter, the mechanism for it. And that's why this is so valuable to understand. It's also useful, though, to kind of back up and see identification also means identity. And interestingly enough, the way I have observed it is awareness is wanting to know itself. It sort of intuitively, naturally does want to know itself, but it doesn't know how. Somehow, for some odd reason, it's going away from itself, out of itself, and attaching to whatever it perceives. And when it does this, it forms into an identity. And so strangely enough, our chief feature is hard for us to see because it feels like our sense of identity. We are seated in it. It feels like me. Because that's how nuanced this thing called identification is, this awareness lapsing out of itself and falling prey to a feeling of identity in whatever it's seeing. And the closest thing to it is our psychology, is our own mind and body. And so that's where it starts. And when we talk about self-remembering and being present, being conscious, being aware, abiding as awareness, talking about awareness, consciousness, not becoming identified. And realizing that it cannot know itself as an object, realizing it can only know itself as the realization of being aware, of being conscious. And the habit is so strong in us we want, you mentioned fears, that chief feature is based on fear. And I would say it's also based on wanting identity. Something in us wants this feeling of security through identity. And it just happens that each of us, when we're born, we have a certain proclivity. Some of us find a sense of identity in being dominant, some in a sense of being vain, some in a sense of being the victim, some in a sense of self-pity or fear, or just living through others, things like this. So it's different for everyone. This is, again, comes back to the individual study. In the end, we have to be observing ourselves. I'm trying to think. So we introduce this idea. You learn that you're identified. You learn that you're most subject to, you find yourself often in this cul-de-sac of your own chief feature again and again and again. What to do, how to proceed. And because oddly, this is odd to say, but we're identified with being identified. And so when we come out of that, we try to not be so identified with being identified. We see that we're identified. We see that we're caught up again in chief feature, for example. You mentioned talking about yourself. So suppose we're somewhere or with someone and there goes again. We realize that we're actually kind of uncomfortable. And we want this feeling of identity to come. We want to fill the space with this feeling of identity. And for some people, that means talking about themselves. And so we find ourselves again in this situation, and we realize we're identified. And so now we try not to be identified with seeing that. And that's the first step, and that's important. For a long time, that's the only step we managed to take. We go, okay, there's Peter again talking about himself, trying to get all the glory, all the attention. Or there's Peter feeling sorry for himself again. And by virtue of just seeing it, isn't it strange that it really all comes back to seeing and realizing yourself as the seeing? But it's a long rope to the surface, you might say, to the surface of pure presence. I think one thing that's important is trying to understand, each person understanding for themselves what it feels like to be identified. And there's an urgency often, or an insistence, or a strong reluctance, a strong resistance. Some people, their first response is no, is to resist everything that happens. And that's a manifestation of some features. But it has the same kind of urgency or intensity about it as someone who is waiting for their chance to step on the stage again and be in the limelight, or to take control, or to refuse others to have an opinion that comes near the value of their own. There's a kind of an urgency, an intensity. Mm-hmm. And to begin to feel this in yourself, you can feel the transmission revving. Mm-hmm. And to begin to feel to know what that feels like, and to see that. And then it's almost by virtue of you just see it, that immediately has an effect on it. Doesn't make it go away, but it sort of takes your foot off the gas pedal. At least the engine starts to slow down. It's back in neutral now. And this can bring awareness closer back to its source, back home. We're so accustomed to going out of ourselves, away from the source of our awareness, out into manifestation and out into the world. We're so used to that one directional feeling of being alive. And what we're trying now is to go back, to return to the source to return to itself, to realize itself. And it's interesting, it's often associated with a feeling of calm, a feeling of quiet, feeling of serenity. Mm-hmm. All of these are really or descriptions of what it feels like to not be identified. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this is true whether you're showing off or if you're feeling sorry for yourself. Neither of those are a feeling of calm, surety of being. Just to be quiet and not be seeking a sense of identity. It's odd to say that, but just to be here now, to be wherever you are, and just realize you're here. It sounds too simple. But this is very hard to do for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, without interference or without succumbing to interference that arises from our body and from our mind. To keep seeing those come up and not let them disturb this presence, for this presence not to be drawn into them or feel like it has to fight them or resist them. Yes, identification is so multifaceted. It's not one thing. And this is why it takes time to see it. and learn to navigate. Swimming back upstream to the source is in many ways you're going against all the rapids. You're going upstream now. This is true mastery, true self-mastery, navigating this upstream journey against identification and imagination and back to the source. And it's consciousness mastering itself. That's the thing. If you sit in the room and you just try to be present, you disallow, you could say you disallow the mind from, you don't stop it. It's still there. It still produces thoughts. You still have emotions and sensations, but you disallow identification. This is consciousness itself, awareness itself, mastering itself, being the master of itself. It doesn't mean Peter is now the master of himself and can control all his behavior and prevent him from succumbing to desire or anything like that. No, this is consciousness. And that's a nice way to think about it when you're trying to be present. This is real meditation, in fact. Consciousness, simply trying to be conscious. Again, it sounds too simple on the one hand or nonsensical on the other. This may sound nonsensical to some people listening, but that's it. And that's all. And then you just go deeper and deeper and deeper into that.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger and I was informed and studying these ideas and practicing, self-remembering the best I could, and I already discovered chief features that were very strong. It's called vanity and superiority and dominance and power, and exactly this what happened for me was to as a person, as a me that was uninvestigated, as a Mihai, I was trying to control these manifestations. Also, vanity doesn't like to be seen as vain. So vanity is very interested in hiding its vanity. Also, vanity is very interested to work on itself, not to have vanity so that it is perfect. So basically, for a long time, for me, from a good intention, and I was basically, my false personality was working on itself, trying to be more perfect and more in control. And that's why I really respectfully feel that this idea of identification, actually, it's although it's important to be mentioned at the beginning, it is almost not practical in some way. It's hard to observe it because we are identified all the time. And if I would have heard you some time ago about identity and talking about identity and identity this, identity that, I would be like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's me. Yeah. What do you mean? Yeah, it's yeah. So in order to really experientially understand identification in oneself, it's important to experience some times where one is less identified. And as Peter mentioned, when we are less identified, our consciousness has a little bit more time being conscious of itself and of the environment. There's a certain perfume, as Francis would say, there's a perfume or different flavors of perfume, like okayness, peace, spaciousness, more spaciousness, quietness of mind, spontaneity, less worries. Then it goes deeper into more emotional qualities and stuff like that. So we need to, and then the personality is not like that. It's it's a contracted sense of, yeah, urgency, turmoil, agitation, problematic, me and them. It's a yeah. But what I feel it's important, and I believe Ouspensky was also talking about that, to establish from the beginning of the work the right division in oneself, at least intellectually. At the beginning, there's no way, but intellectually. And this appears in all the other traditions. Basically, in Buddhism, Buddha says, you know, where thought arises, it's not me, it's not I, it's just a thought coming and going. Feeling arises, it's not me, not I, it's just a feeling coming and going. I am that which is aware of it. In the Hindu non-duality is that the witness is there and all the phenomena arising to the witness. Yeah, so in the fourth way, they talk about the real identity, or you are that which observes, not that which is being observed. So yeah, it's important to establish this right division in oneself, upon which there will be a solid foundation for so-called working on oneself. And in the fourth way, it's recommended to put like this, as what we call I is that which is aware. I is that which is aware, and at the beginning or for some time we can include in the I camp interest in the work and the study of these ideas and applying these ideas. We call this I. And then everything else is Mihai Algiu, or Peter, or Ouspensky. So there's a division between I and Mihai. And so the work is to keep jump-starting the quality of observing, and then to observe Mihai, this Mihai, which is all these eyes, as we call it, the many eyes coming from the different centers, as well as different patterns, different lies, deception, falseness, all of this. So it's really important to do that, because the trap is to start doing witnessing awareness work, but we call I what we like, and not me or Mihai what we don't like. So it becomes kind of confused and not objective, not impartial. And about this identity, yeah, so in sleep, the identity is in the mind, in the body, in the chi feature. So I'm not good enough, I'm better, I'm afraid, I want recognition, I want security, I want control, this aspect of ourselves. So in sleep, the identity is in that, and the true identity, there is an identity, the true identity is this impersonal, formless, mysterious, invisible presencing.
As I was listening to you, Mihai, I was looking at a flower in front of me, and it brings to mind this thought that when you really, for example, you talked about being quiet, trying to find times when we're not identified, and understand what that is, which is more just being. And that when you sit with nature, for example, you look at a flower or a tree or the ocean or the sky, the mountains, whatever it is, and you really perceive them, you forget yourself as a feeling of identity. There's just the presence. There's just this, you're just seeing, you're perceiving, and you don't necessarily have a sense of identity. And if this is happening consciously, it's quite different because this you can also get so identified you forget yourself you forget you exist and you lose yourself in what you're doing. Let's say you're working with your hands, you're doing some intricate work with your hands. You can become so immersed in it, which is also a form of identification. You lose the recognition that you're of yourself doing it. You are just doing it. You're lost. But what I'm talking about is when you recognize you're looking at nature, but you're perceiving it, you disappear almost as a sense of identity, but not as awareness. Whereas if this was not a flower in front of me, if this was a person, what happens often is we look at another person and they're looking at us. And if you look closely, you can see the fear that Mihai was talking about. We are afraid. There's a fear related to our feeling of identity. And we are worried, you could almost say we are worried, we're afraid of what the other person looking at us is thinking or perceiving or concluding, because we feel as though they are seeing our identity. And this is false personality. This is what some traditions call the ego. This is this sense of identity. And we're very unstable when this is happening. And it's happening in our psychology. And our consciousness is attached to it and identified with it. But I say this because this is why it can be useful when you're quiet, when you're by yourself, and you're just noticing things. And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a flower, but it can be a chair. It can be a rock. It can be anything. And to kind of study, why is it that I'm not afraid? Why is there no agitation internally when I just look at the flower? But as soon as I find myself with another person or even on the telephone with someone, there's this mild, you can feel it. You can feel the transmission starting in the car. And you can feel that the identification, what's called identification, has a low hum to it, as well as a loud roar and you can go racing around the track when you're super identified. But it's almost always there, as you were saying. It's the most beautiful moments in our life are when it's not there at all, that hum, that agitation. And there is that peace, that contentment. Because, why? We no longer are attached to a feeling of identity. It's just being.
Yeah, that's interesting that when you look at nature, trees, or interact with a safe animal, like not dangerous animal, pet and a cat, we are relaxed. We are more like in essence, and relaxed and feeling safe. And you ask, well, how, as you now, a person comes in the room and something is extra now, and like, why is that? I mean, I definitely know from background in healing and psychotherapy that we've been hurt and shocked through relations with people. So somehow from early on, we've been hurt, shocked, chastised. So then there is this like that's been created many times, and then from that, actually the formation of false personality was in interaction with humans, with mother, father, society, teachers, either how they told us how to be, how not to be, which is unavoidable. We need to be socialized a little bit, but then also through having been hurt or shocked, ostracized, shut down. Something in us adapted it in order to have less of that, to get love and approval and safety, and we became slightly different. So this pattern of, it's a pattern of being very different than what we really are in order to get love, approval, or safety. Well, another very practical pointer and direction of inner exploration and conscious struggle. Yeah, even before determining, or as we determine ourselves what's our chief feature and core pattern, where we are most identified, there are some general manifestations that it seems like all people have, definitely the people in the West, that it is very safe to observe and drop them on sight. We might be able to do it, but yeah, so this area of having judgments about other people, like condemnation, judgments, how things should be, this idea how things should be or how people should be, the should in the world, should shot out in the world or towards other people, should in oneself, this area of gossip, talking about people in a certain way to just aggrandize oneself or be right, this catastrophizing, which is just a negative imagination, anticipating future bad stuff happening. So this, whenever, and a commentary, also this idea of a commentary, a narrator that is present, like a nature documentary. There's the narrator, commentator, and associator. And this is very tricky because I see people who are really interested in the work, and also they have a slightly strong intellectual component, and they are really like passionate about these teachings and they are studying, and then I can see that there's a lot of talking about the work in the head. It's a lot of ideas about this center, about that thing, and about the law of 7 and the 3 and the interval. And so there's basically the commentator and the narrator, the usual one, has been replaced by a commentator narrator about the work. And now it's like some imagination, being in imagination and in the mind about the work. And that be very satisfying for the person, and it seems like it's doing the work, but it's not. So yeah, to watch out for these things. And whenever we catch these things, and we oh no, some people have self you know, the negative voice in the head, being upset with ourselves, putting ourselves down, being negative towards ourselves. So it's really important to know that this is, whenever this happens, we are asleep, identified. Also, this is really toxic towards the body as well, and the mind, and it has a lot of negative side effects. So, and these are stuff that it's safe to notice, and if we are aware enough and we have the decision, we don't consent to it. We come, we don't consent to it, and then we reinitiate being present. And then there's no side effect if we drop them, basically gradually. It will take some time because this negative voice in the head is been practiced for a long time. But I noticed with people, even they are not very interested in fourth way or awakening, they are just coming to me as clients, and I help them see this negative voice in the head and where it's coming from and what it does and the seeming payoff and the big cost. And they are able to notice it. They're able to notice it and to no longer go there. So That's what I would recommend, to observe these things and struggle with them.
And these are all the things you've described. They are a result of identification. Because as soon judgment, if we could just observe and not identify, judgment would not form. But because we identify, this identification takes the form of judgment, criticism, disapproval, worrying, did I do something wrong in relation to someone, all these things. And this is because when awareness begins to form as a sense of identity, what the impulse we feel, and this depends on our chief feature, but the impulse we feel is either to project our sense of identity in some way to others and onto others, or to protect our sense of identity in relation to other people. And this can also take the form of wanting to hide. We want to sort of hide away, shrink away. But whether we are projecting our sense of identity onto others and feeling the need to do that, or feeling the need to protect and defend our sense of identity, this will depend on the kind of judgment, for example, that we have or that we tend toward. Because some people will feel that they feel they're being judged by other people all the time, versus judging other people all the time, being critical of others, condemning others, feeling superior to others, finding fault in situations all the time. Always being the active judger as opposed to being the judgee, I guess you could call it, the person being judged. But some people go through their day, all day, worrying about being judged.
Mm-hmm.
And others go through their day just judging. And this, again, it's so subtle. This is these nuanced forms that our personality, our feeling of being a person, our identity takes, and the forms that identification takes. And yet it can be that when you start to see this, you start to see how prevalent judgment is in all these forms. You just see it. It's as though you're looking out the window and you realize you're looking through the glass to see what's outside. And the judgment is like the glass, but it's normally not transparent. And the more we observe, what happens is the judgment may still tend to form, but it becomes more transparent. And we just are able to see through it. And as you say, put it aside, disregard it. We're not trying to fight it. We're not trying to become a person who never judges. We're not trying to overcome it. We're not trying to fix it. It's by virtue of being more conscious as the observing of it that renders it more transparent. And now this filter doesn't prevent us so much from seeing actually what we're perceiving. Because something else Ouspensky pointed out, and this has to do with just other people, judging other people. Not judging whether or not there should be poverty and wars in the world, that kind of thing, but just other people. He pointed out that when you are more present, and when you begin to see that your sense of identity is an imagined, falsely constructed psychological phenomenon, it's not consciousness. When you really begin to see that and you become objective in that way toward yourself, now this opens the door for seeing the same about other people. Mm-hmm. And if we were to really look without judgment, we would see that other people are also not consciousness. We would see they are a vessel, and that vessel is most often, what's happening in it is the consciousness housed in that vessel is identified with the vessel and is projecting itself a certain way or hiding or protecting itself. And that really life on earth is about this dance between egos, this dance between people imagining themselves to be a certain way. But consciousness cannot hold itself up, it can't stand upright long enough for that to happen. It collapses, and one of the things it collapses into most easily is judgment. Because then we think we kind of know what's going on. And really, the more conscious you become, the more you realize you don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going to happen. You see there's so much more that you don't understand than that you do understand. Even though you come to understand things more fully too. But anyway, judgment is a wonderful mirror, and this is how we can approach it. Instead of thinking of trying to change it, stop it, we can also use it as a mirror. It becomes a mirror that reflects our false sense of ourselves back to us. So this is why it can be so interesting if you find someone and you really kind of don't like them, and you're really judging them all the time, to see it as a reflection of yourself. Why is that? Usually, for example, vanity will judge vanity in other people. Dominance will judge dominance in other people, and so on.
I like how you brought this up. Uspensky had this term, I really love this term, the imaginary picture of oneself. False personality or ego or the separate self, or I like this, the imaginary picture of oneself. And Uspensky says that for a long time we imagine ourselves really. So this sense of me as a Peter or Mihai, it's an imagined, it's a projection, it's a projection of the real consciousness, the presence, being producing this movie and being identified with it and not knowing itself. And yeah, I think for this episode we already touched on that, so let's make it more clear. Yeah, it's important to observe this, what's called, it's another obstacle, this inner considering. Inner considering, this is one of the major obstacles where we are most unconscious, and where false personality is the imagined self is all wrapped up in it. This desire to get approval, being approved of, getting recognition, approval, being, people think we are okay, or people think we are good, and making sure they don't think we are not good. So this whole dance is a whole body, mind, mental, emotional, energetic, psychic, sensation kind of dance that is very stressful, where we are trying to other people see that we are okay. And yeah, so this is something that it's important to start observing in oneself and kind of investigating in more detail. And yeah, this is like lack of freedom. This is not essence. This is being in a tight shoe. It is big suffering. Basically, the more people have this inner considering, the more all of these obstacles we talk in the fourth way, when people have more of that, becomes a clinical case, becomes clinical, you know. So all of these obstacles that regular people, so-called healthy people have, when they get to higher intensity, it becomes social anxiety, it becomes agoraphobia, it becomes the narcissistic personality disorder, you know. But we all have all of this to some degree.
What's also interesting, this was stimulated when you said it a moment ago, Mihai, is that in truth, other people usually don't care that much about us. They're not as interested in us as we imagine, and we're inner considering them, and they are preoccupied with themselves and their point of view. And what's also interesting is if someone else is judging us, when you come to see this more clearly, you see that their consciousness is identified with them as a person, and that sense of themselves, their imaginary idea of themselves as a person, is judging you as a person, and your imaginary idea of yourself is worried about that. It's kind of ironic that if we are being judged, it's kind of meaningless. But we take it so personally, and we take it so seriously, and we again are relying on a sense of identity based on other people's view of us as a feeling of identity, as a sense of identity. It's quite a it's quite a tragedy and a comedy at the same time. And then it's an amazing phenomenon when you stop and think about this is the nature of humanity. What's called humanity on the surface of the earth, a thing called earth. And this is all happening in this psychological arena of each person. It's very peculiar. It's very odd. It's very strange. And it's like one big dream. But we're governed by it, and we're living our life in this. And it's completely fabrication. It's complete fabrication produced by the mind. Isn't that extraordinary? But and to slip out of that, for awareness to slip out of that, is really for it to slip into the higher dimension of itself. It's like slipping into outer space. Imagine that you're on Earth and all this stuff's happening, and then you slip out, and now you find yourself in outer space, and it's perfectly quiet. And there's no conflict.
Yeah, actually, your metaphor, or like looking at humanity, if we can have this like CD, this power, looking at humanity like Superman, and you are aware of their inner world as they go about the street and the thoughts they have. Basically, in a second state, the whole humanity is unaware of the bigger picture, unaware of the universe, and they're all self-absorbed. Basically, the personality is self-absorbed in some dilemmas and self-torture and turmoil, and then now also with the electronics and all of that, kind of self-absorbed and absorbed in these things, and it's really shocking to see. So you see in oneself, you see in other people too. So two short things I have here. So one is that all of these things we talked today, chief feature, psychological patterns, pleasing pattern, needing approval, trying to be good, inner considering. So when we observe this, to observe it at the level of the body as well. Because it may be a tendency to more like focus on the psychology and the thoughts, but all of these things we described today, these phenomena, they have a corresponding level in the body. They are energies, they are sensations, they are contractions, and as we are being present and observing, to include this in our observation. Otherwise, the mental aspect is just the top of the iceberg. And the second thing I want to say, we talked today about all these things that are, the more become more awake, you see this and you are a little like, oh God, it's like horrified, or it's not, doesn't seem like progress. It seems like the more aware we are, the more we see all these wrongdoings and all of this terrible stuff. And so a very important principle in the fourth way, to use all of this so-called wrongdoings or wrong work of centers or sleep, to use this as an alarm clock. So the idea is like, whenever I catch myself with some judging, to use this alarm clock, to be more present, come back to the present, drop it. Whenever I'm gossiping, whenever I catch myself this, to use this alarm clock. So it's a very alchemical process here. We are taking something of a lower, denser frequency, and we use that to make us more awake. And it's very important because if we don't apply that, we see something dense and lower in oneself, and then we are going to wallow in it and feel bad about it. So then, this is from one angle secondary sleep. We notice sleep, and then we beat ourselves up about being asleep.
Yes, we keep seeing more and more layers. That's similar to what you said a moment ago about when you are thinking about things one way, and then you start thinking about them from the perspective of this work. And then you have to notice that too. You have to see that layer also. And the same thing when we start to see these things about ourselves. We also have to notice the layer of judgment about ourselves. And see, that's also coming from this false sense of identity, this imaginary sense of I that wants to fix itself, that wants to change things. And rightfully so, and yet it's doing so from the wrong place. Real change comes through observation. And the more pure the observation, the less identification there is behind the observation, the more change will happen by itself.
Well, I suggest we stop here with this episode. And I feel we can do one more on this beginner's first steps. And we'll probably talk next time about very important obstacle and very important area of sleep around our suffering. Unnecessary self-created suffering, negative emotion, reactivity, and how to bring the work to suffering and unpleasant emotions. We'll do that next time, as well as perhaps about observing the different functions, the different centers in oneself. That's essential fourth way work. But what we recommend for people interested, we touched here on a zoomed out perspective, general and introductory. But if this interests you, in this playlist, we have a whole video, maybe an hour, 2 hours on false personality. We have a few videos on all the chief features, chief patterns, in depth with exercises and how to consciously struggle with it. We have a video on inner considering, so you can go more in depth about the stuff we talked here. And feel free to ask any questions or topic of interest. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mihai.